So much respect for him. He's dedicated his life in the name of his daughter to fighting gun violence and gun safety measures. And I know he has a lot to say when it comes to this fourth Donald Trump indictment. Great amount of respect for the man we have right now. Of course, I'm talking about Fred Guttenberg, who joins us again on Pushing the Limits. Fred, I appreciate you so much for coming back on. How are you, sir?
Like you, Brian, just blown away.
Yeah, I am too. I am too. What was the first thing that went through your mind, Fred, when you heard about the fourth indictment that took place yesterday?
Put the guy behind bars already.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, other than his enablers who are on the other side and who are going to be who they are, it is what it is. We all knew it. We all watched it. We all saw it. We all heard it. There is nothing that he's been charged with that we didn't all see with our very own eyes. And, you know, I've said now for probably the better part of a year, any campaign for president is really a sham, because it's really just his effort to avoid criminal charges. He doesn't care about being president. And his behavior over the past week, really just to really directly answer your question, had me hoping that he would actually be treated like any other criminal. And we may still see that, but it hasn't happened yet.
You know, I hope so. And you tweeted something out yesterday that's really important. I wanted to talk about this. I remember, I believe it was the State of the Union, Donald Trump's speech. And in the middle of that speech, you got up and what are you going to do about gun violence, and mentioning your daughter and the loss of your poor daughter. And you were handcuffed, right? You were detained during that time. Here you are, an innocent man. You lost your daughter. You're grieving. That pain never goes away. And it's not like you called Donald Trump a name or anything like that. What are you going to do about all this gun violence, Mr. President? And you were detained. How is it possible that somebody like you, Fred, you're detained and you see all the statements that Donald Trump has made since that first indictment?
So in response to his behavior that night, and specifically comments he was making around Second Amendment, I got up and I said 9 words. What about victims of gun violence like my daughter? And for that, I was cuffed. All my belongings were removed from me. I was transported in a paddy wagon with my hands cuffed to the back wall so that I wouldn't fall off the bench. And then I was brought to a detention facility where I was cuffed to a wall. And thankfully, Speaker Pelosi and former Congressman Ted Deutsch, as soon as that speech ended, worked on my release. And I was supposed to have been in jail that entire night, but I ended up getting out in the middle of the night. But it was for saying 9 words. 9 words. And again, we talk about First Amendment. I'm still not really sure what I was arrested for. Arrest the guy. He was given a stern warning on Friday by the Washington judge. She made it clear what the boundaries are. And he went ahead and he crossed the boundaries. Arrest the guy.
And
Just do it.
I agree. And I think what's, even to your specific case, you had to sit in a courtroom a few feet away from the animal who killed your daughter. You stayed silent. You didn't interfere at all. You weren't saying things that would interfere in that case. You stood silent. You lost your daughter. You stood silent. You still did the right thing. And yet, and you talked about this on social media, every single case, Donald Trump is intimidating, interfering, making threats towards the FBI. You saw that tweet. And what, from your perspective, you've been through it. You've been through the most excruciating trial any father could ever have to go for. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And yet you see the former president interfering in every single case.
Let's be clear on this, because it is, to me, such a crucial point. Not only me, all the other families, we sat there in that courtroom silently. Why? Because we knew, had we opened our mouths, we A, ran the risk of influencing the jury, which B, would potentially run the risk of a mistrial. We ran the risk of running afoul of the law, okay? We followed the law with our silence, okay? It is not a hard thing to do. And Donald Trump is intentionally not being silent with the intention of influencing potential jurors and the whole process. Listen, the truth is, Donald Trump is trying to get arrested. He actually, this is not hard to figure out at this point. He wants to be cuffed, okay? Which is why I think nobody's rushing to do it, because his threats of violence. There are these crazy tweets from the New Hampshire Libertarian Party last night, talking about with a photo of sitting members of Congress and saying, basically, this is why we need, all these high capacity magazines, threatening violence against sitting members of Congress. Donald Trump wants to be cuffed. Donald Trump wants the violence that will follow. It doesn't matter. We need to not be afraid of what might happen, and we need to do what's right. I always taught my children, you always do what's right, okay, not what's easy. And this is the moment where we as a country need to do what's right, and he should be arrested.
I wanted to ask you about that tweet from the LPNH Twitter feed, where, as you just mentioned, they show this picture of the House chambers, and then they're talking about the Second Amendment. Number one, how can Twitter or X or whatever it's called now keep that up? And number two, why isn't law enforcement involved? To me, that is a direct threat to members of Congress, right, and the president.
Well, listen, it's the reason why I personally tagged all of law enforcement, Secret Service, FBI, Department of Justice, because they ought to be involved. That was a direct threat. And not only was it a direct threat, they kept doubling down. They kept on talking about the need to attack this government. Okay. It wasn't like they made a stupid mistake. They made an intentional decision to put the threat out there, and they believe they're justified. Okay. So I got to tell you, I hope law enforcement pays them a visit, because what they're doing, they're not alone. And law enforcement is going to have to respond when people come out and say, we're going to be some of those that are going to be out there shooting our guns at some of the elected officials. Law enforcement ought to take a look.
If you're just joining us, Advocate Fred Guttenberg on the line with us. Fred, I want to ask you a little bit about this, too. A lot of people on the right are attacking Joe Biden for sending all this money to the Ukraine, and he's not helping our own. When he just held a press conference, he declared a state of emergency 3 hours after the fires in Maui. He sent money, and he's going to be sending more. And he said he doesn't want to go over there because he doesn't want to get in the way. And I feel like, you tell me if you disagree or not, I feel like these MAGAs out there, these MAGA supporters, they love seeing Trump throwing toilet paper and MAGA hats out there and more like a campaign rally. Biden just doesn't want to get in the way. He wants to help the people, but he doesn't want to get in the way. And Republicans are lying.
Well, listen. So you mean they lied? Like we're surprised?
Yeah.
I'll say this. Joe Biden is doing the right thing by supporting and defending Ukraine. Democracy depends on it around the world. Joe Biden is also supporting Hawaii. The nonsense that he's not, and that he's not because of Ukraine, is a made-up fantasy by the people who make up fantasies, such as the election was stolen. Okay, and so I'm at a place now where I'm kind of, screw the MAGA people. They don't function in a world of facts. They function in the world of alternative facts. We know that. They told us they would. Okay. So you know what? Let's focus on talking to what would you say MAGA is as a percentage of the country? 30% of the country?
Probably something like that.
Okay. So let's focus on talking to the other 70%, which is Democrats, independents, and a lot of Republicans who refuse to be a part of MAGA. Let's talk to them.
Sure. I mean, but you've interacted. You've had interactions with people, right? Like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, who continue to make excuses for Donald Trump, who continue to call it a two-tier justice system. And they want to talk about Hunter Biden's laptop which from what I understand, no evidence correlation to Joe Biden committing any crimes. What would be your message to them right now? The politicians in office like right now, many of whom you've spoken to about gun control issues, people like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz.
Listen, unless I slept through a few years, as far as I know, Hunter Biden was never president. That's number one. Number two, if Hunter Biden did anything wrong, he's going to be held accountable, and he should be. And investigated. I have no issue with that. See, that's the difference. If there's something there, investigate it, but use real facts, not the sham stuff that they're doing in the congressional committee, calling witnesses that it turns out have disappeared and all sorts of other nonsense. Investigate it. Let's find out. If he did something wrong, he'll be held accountable. And if he didn't, we move on. The same holds true for Trump. Just because his name is Trump doesn't mean he didn't commit crimes. He did. We watched it. We saw it. We know it.
Isn't it interesting, Fred, that when we talk about Ukraine and Republicans talk about Ukraine, they say, well, we need to take care of our own first. But yet when it comes to gun control, you know this better than anybody, the overwhelming majority, not all, but the overall majority of those people that are complaining about all the money we're sending to Ukraine have done literally nothing and refuse to do nothing when it comes to gun control measures.
Again, it's a lie because by doing the right thing with foreign policy and in Ukraine, it doesn't mean that President Biden isn't investing in this country. In fact, there's been record historic investments on gun policy. Okay. President Biden is the first president in 30 years who's actually getting something done. But you are right. The hypocrites and the liars on the other side. It's the reason I wrote the book, American Carnage. Yep. The hypocrites and the liars, they say anything trying to make it fact, even though it isn't. And they do nothing to protect the lives of those we love from walking around on streets, in parks, in stores, at school. They refuse to do anything because they're liars, they're hypocrites, and they shouldn't be serving. But some of them, unfortunately, have managed to get elected.
Fred, since you've lived a portion of your life in Florida, I have to ask you about Ron DeSantis. I mean, now he's almost apologizing with the whole Disney situation, and he's saying he just wants it to go away, and he wishes the lawsuit would be done because Disney's suing him, rightfully so. I mean, it just seems like he's been self-destructing by the day. I just want to ask you, someone who lives in Florida, what do you make of Ron DeSantis, and what do you make of his poll numbers just continuing to drop?
So, listen, about 6 months ago, and I'm trying to think of which interview it was on. It might have been with Nicole Wallace. I said Ron DeSantis will never perform on the national stage, and because while he had a big win in his reelection, that win was the result of his base turning out and Democrats sitting home. But overall, people don't love Ron DeSantis because he's a completely unlikable, strange, weird guy. And you're seeing that on the trail. He is an unlikable, strange, weird guy. But he's an unlikable, strange, weird guy who actually believed that the further he doubled down on this base crap, the more people would want him. And the truth is, people are looking at it now saying, no, we don't want that. And by the way, while you were doing that, how in the world did you screw up the homeowners insurance market in Florida so bad? Okay. Ron DeSantis right now couldn't win re-election in Florida. Okay. So he's done. He is done as a national figure, and he'll soon be done in Florida.
And Trump I believe, is beating him by 20 points in Florida right now.
Florida, yeah.
Yes. I want to ask you this. It seems to me that there are some Republicans out there that think drag queens and transgenders are more of a threat to kids in this country than actual gun violence. What would you say to them, and do you agree with that?
A, I don't agree with it. And B, I think they are despicable, disgusting human beings who have their own, I think, issues with their own sexuality that they're troubled with. And maybe they ought to seek help for their own issues, but leave everyone else alone. Okay. And if you really care about kids, if you really care, you would make our streets, our places of worship, our churches, our shopping centers, and our schools safer and freer from gun violence. And until you're ready to do that, shut the hell up.
I could not agree with you more. I always wanted to ask you this question, Fred. There are a lot of Democrats out there that, although they don't dislike Joe Biden, they'd like to see somebody else run in 2024. Are you one of those people that totally okay with Joe Biden running again, or would you rather see somebody else in there?
So I think the world of Joe Biden, and I will support Joe Biden every which way I possibly can heading into the next election. He has been, I think, the best president we've had in generations. When you look at infrastructure, when you look at the bill to reduce gun violence, when you look at the CHIPS Act, when you look at what he did for veterans with burn pit legislation, I mean, I could go through the entire list, okay? The environment. He has done more for people of all generations, young and old, that will affect people for generations to come. So when I hear people say, oh, they wish he wouldn't run again, I think that's based upon age, and I think it's unfortunate. Yeah. And I think judge the man on what he has done as president and get over it, because unlike many of those people who say those things, I'm someone who's actually been in the room with Joe Biden.
Right.
I'm someone who's had a chance to engage with Joe Biden. And I got to tell you something. Joe Biden is doing just fine. So to all my friends who understand the threat to democracy, to all my friends who understand just how important it is what Joe Biden has done in his first term, you don't need to fall in love with him. You don't need to see everything in him that you wish for, but you need to vote. And you need to vote for him, no questions asked. And in 24, we need to annihilate MAGA.
I agree with you on that. I'm on board with that. What would be your message to all the people out there on the right that are saying we have a two-tier justice system, that, they treat Democrats, the DOJ, Biden's DOJ? You've heard the excuses from the MAGA world. What would be your response, Fred, to people out there that say we have a two-tier justice system?
Listen, you're right. Look at what Donald Trump's getting away with. That would be my response. He has been treated differently by the justice system than others in this country would be if they had committed such crimes. He has been given more freedom and latitude than I was for saying, what about victims of gun violence like my daughter? So there is a two-tier justice system. He has been a beneficiary of it. And any notion that we shouldn't hold him accountable for everything we watched, everything we heard, everything we know because we saw it, is just BS. But Donald Trump has been a beneficiary, and that's the problem.
When it's all said and done, Fred, do you believe that we will see the day, could be a year, could be 2 years, that Donald Trump will actually have to be behind bars? Do you see that happening down the road?
I think, I'll say it this way. I think with certainty, his accountability is coming. And I think it will take multiple forms. I'm not sure a former president behind bars is one of those forms. I think at some point, there may be a conversation between the current president and the former president. But I think he'll have to face financial accountability. I think he'll have to face political reality. I don't think he's going to be saved by the election.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that's probably the main reason why he wants all these cases on hold, because he wants to try to be the president first. And who knows, maybe he would pardon himself.
He would.
Who knows?
Right? Oh, he would.
Yeah. Probably. What do you make of guys like Chris Christie and Hutchinson? There are some Republicans out there running for president, even though they have no chance to win. Chris Christie's pretty much been on a tour of speaking out on Donald Trump. Do you say to yourself, Fred, better late than ever? Or do you say to yourself, I don't have much respect for you now because where were you 4 years ago? You enabled Trump. What do you make of some of these Republicans? There's not many of them, but some of them that are now speaking out against Donald Trump and his lies and speaking truth. What do you make of that?
I think anybody, I don't care if you're Republican or not, who decides, even if it's late, that they're going to put democracy first, come on over and stand with me, and I'll stand with you. Chris Christie decided Donald Trump is too big a threat to democracy, and he wants to be a human wrecking ball to Donald Trump. And you know what? I will support him. One of my very close friends, someone you've had on the show before also, Joe Walsh.
Sure, I love Joe.
A guy who, heck, part of the reason we have Donald Trump, and he knows it, okay? But eventually he saw it. And to all of those who served in the Trump administration, who are now out there sounding the alarms, okay? I wish you would have done it long before you did, but thank you for coming now.
Yeah.
Because this country is worth it. It's worth the fight. I don't hate you for coming late. I thank you.
Yeah, it's better late than ever. That's the way I see it. I want to give you an opportunity, Fred, before we let you go. Talk to me a little bit about your book, how people could get their hands on it, and just the charity work that you continue to do, you and your family. I just have so much respect for you and your family and what you've done to help so many others. Just talk to me a little bit about that in your book, if you can.
Yeah. So the book is American Carnage that I wrote with Tom Gabor, who's a criminologist. And we take on the lies and the myths that have fueled gun violence in America. And part of what motivated me, my daughter would have turned 20 this July. If you go back 20 years ago in America, we had 200 million weapons. Today, we have 400 million, actually over 400 million. If you go back 20 years ago in America, AR-15s were under 2% of all guns sold. Today, they're over 25%. I just told you everything you need to know to understand why we're seeing the gun violence that we're seeing today. Everything else is BS. The question is, how did we get here? And it was through a series of lies and myths by a lobby that took on a strategy combining with the manufacturers to fuel gun sales at a time when hunting in America was on the decline and we no longer had a draft. And they needed a new way of selling weapons. So they started dividing America into good guys and bad guys, right? And all the bad guys have guns, so all the good guys need guns to defend themselves from the bad guys. That's literally their view of America. And they do it through junk science and BS slogans. And I'll give you an example of one. Mm-hmm. And I'll start the sentence. You'll finish it. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is?
A good guy with a gun.
A good guy with a gun.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, it feels like that slogan's been around for a really long time, right?
Yeah.
10 years. That slogan was never uttered before until a few days after the Sandy Hook shooting. It was the NRA response to the Sandy Hook shooting. They used the Sandy Hook shooting and that slogan to turn that shooting into a gun sales bonanza. That's how we got where we are today. There's so much more. But Tom and I, we want people to be armed with the truth. We want people to understand facts, who we are as a country, who we've always been as a country, and how we got here, so that going forward from this point, you are capable of actually talking about this issue without it being on the gun lobby platform. Right. So the book, I'm super proud of it. Mm-hmm. And I do hope people go out and buy it, because the lives of those you love is now at risk.
Yeah, no question. And, as I always say, when you come on the show, Fred, and I say again, I have so much respect for you and your family and the good that you're doing in the fight. Please keep it up in the name of your daughter and all the victims of gun violence out there. We need more people like you, Fred. Please keep up the great work. Always appreciate it when you take the time to come on. Let's hope we get justice, and let's hope Donald Trump is finally held to account for once in his life. We'll look forward to having you on again down the road, Fred. And thank you so much for your time, my friend. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Somebody that I just have so much respect for, that man, Fred Guttenberg. Obviously an advocate in trying to end the carnage in this country when it comes to gun violence. The innocent people that die in this country every day. One of those innocent people, of course, his beautiful young daughter who died in that school shooting in Parkland.